Hey Mustangs, in this video we're going to be taking a look at succession. Now to take notes for this video, I'm going to ask that you turn to page 79 in your notebook. It's way back. We're on 150 something right now, but you need to jump back to page 79. It should be titled Succession. So taking a look at succession, we're going to be looking at the two different types of succession. There's primary succession and then there's secondary succession. And succession is all about the formation or the building of a community or an ecosystem. It's more focused around the community, the living things in an area. So how a new community forms. And like I said, there's two types. There's primary and then there's secondary succession. So let's go ahead and take a look at primary succession first. So with primary succession, if we take a look here, this is a really good example to see primary succession. So we have here, you start with nothing. So in primary succession, there are no living things. So you start with basically bare rock. A really good example of this would be the formation of volcanic islands, because volcanic islands form out of magma, lava, rocks forming the island, and the island gets bigger and bigger, and it's initially just made out of that rock until communities start to build. So in primary succession, you start with nothing. So you start with bare rock. The first organisms to come are called lichens, and they're usually called pioneer species. So lichens are organisms that come and break apart the rock, and as they break apart the rock and as they die, that forms soil. So now that there's soil, now you have one of the most important organisms that can grow there. If you think about what all ecosystems need, it's energy. So living things need energy. So here we start with the bare rock, and then we get the lichens breaking down the rock and dying, and that creates a soil, and now plants can grow. So you start with small things like grasses and shrubs, stuff like that, and then eventually you get to the point where bigger things can come along, such as trees and bushes and stuff like that. So in primary succession, you start with nothing. Lichens come. They're one of the most important, so don't forget that one. So let me go ahead and write that down. They're called lichens. Okay, so lichens come along, and the CH, I know it's not ch sound, but it's a k sound. So lichens come along and break apart the soil, break apart the rock and die and help create soil. Then smaller plants can finally start growing, and then you have finally the bigger plants. And plants, of course, remember, producers, autotrophs, they are the base of a community. They're the base of a food chain, the base of a food web. They're the ones that are necessary for everything else to be successful. So that is your primary succession. So you start with nothing and you break apart soil, then finally the plants can grow. All right, secondary succession is different. Secondary succession, a community's already been established, but it gets destroyed somehow. So it could be a lake that dries up, and there used to be a community there, but now a new community is going to form out of that. A really big example is volcanic eruptions. Volcanic eruptions can decimate an area and kill lots of trees and plants and animals, and that area has to start over again. So in secondary succession, again, it's very predictable, where you have certain types of organisms that start off. So you start off with some simpler organisms, and then it gets a little bit more complex, a little bit more. So secondary succession, you don't start off with bare rock. You actually start off with some parts of the community already there, and you build upon it. And that's the difference between primary succession and secondary succession. And usually the biggest example that's used is volcanic eruptions, how they destroy an area. That area has to rebuild again, but there's already stuff there. There's already soil. There's already smaller plants that survived and stuff like that. And even some bigger plants sometimes survive. And the community has to build anew from that. And that's secondary succession.